In this video, we're going to build an adjustable table leg assembly that attaches and detaches from the leaf with a toolless design of our own. This is actually really bad. There's actually no hardware possible. First, starting at one side. We're going to use a router and wood tools. We're going to weld. We're going to cut. We even lost some of our video footage, and we're going to overcome that obstacle. So follow us back to the shop, and we'll show you how we built this. We're back at the shop. I went and dug some scrap out of our scrap bin, and I'm about to clean off all the rust and make it to where it's easier for our Sharpie and our marking pens to show up so we can get something done. I'm using a dual action sander, which means it spins like a grinder and it rotates around the axis. So this should not leave cut marks. We're cleaning off the rust and cleaning off the dirt so we have a clean surface to weld on and a clean surface to mark on. That's not perfect, but I knocked the barnacles off. We got enough of the rust off where we should be able to weld on this, and we can see our chalk pens or a Sharpie to cut it too. I'm going to clean up some of our plate, and then we can start making cuts, or marking anyway. So I hit all that with my sander, and I'm going to pull the towels off our top over here and get some measurements, and we're just going to start making cuts. Let's see what looks good over here. I'm keeping these covered up so we don't get them dirty. The homeowner made this top and the island top that we saw already at the beginning of the video out of a tree he cut off the property. I really don't want to hurt it. I think I'm going to make the spanner on the bottom 22 inches long, but I believe that's excessive for up here. I feel like 16 inches is probably a pretty good length. So we'll cut our flat plate to 16 inches, and we'll cut our spanner for the bottom 22. And that's going to be a good place to start. And then I have a measurement written down for the height. So let's start by cutting our flat plate 16 and go from there. We're going to check square on our flat plate. See if I need to clean up this cut or if it's ready to go. That cut is really square already, so that's fantastic. All right, I'm using a soapstone to mark on this steel. And to get the most accurate marking I can, we're going to sharpen it on a file first. We're just going to file out two sides so we have a good point. We're going to cut two pieces of steel. One piece of this flat plate is going to screw to the tabletop and have nuts welded to the back side of it. The second piece of flat plate is what's going to weld to our table leg and the whole unit that'll be detachable. And we'll drill holes through that and use bolts with some kind of tab to hold the two pieces of flat plate together. That way this is removable and he can pack it away easily. So I'll make our 16-inch mark. There we are, right at 16. Lay our framing square up there using the sharpened end. And I have a good soapstone mark across our plate. I'm going to double check and see. Looks like 16 inches is just this side of the line right against the line. So I'll keep that in mind when I make my cut. I might need to change this wheel part way through, but we're going to give it a shot. we got one more cut out of this wheel, but I'd say it's time to change it now. We're going to take the battery out of our grinder before we change the wheel so we don't have an accident. And it turns out we're going to need a tool to loosen it. Sometimes these will come off by hand. Putting it back on hand tight's good enough for me. All right. Let's check and see if we got 16. That looks good to me. Let's check our cut for square on this end before we just assume it's right. I'm happy with that. That still looks good. I was contemplating setting this up and tracing it versus marking again because these are going to stack. Ultimately, it doesn't matter exactly if they're 16 inches as long as they're the same length. So let's see if we can get a good trace on this. So since I traced that, that means my soapstone mark is going to be on the drop. The piece I want is going to be everything soapstone didn't touch. So when I make my cut, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I cut through the soapstone mark, take the soapstone off, and these should be exactly the same size. Cool, we got two pieces cut. I probably should be wearing gloves for this. They're getting a little bit warm. And they are the same size. I'm very pleased with that. I think I'm gonna put a clamp on them, clean the ends up with a grinding wheel, and see about maybe drilling holes or maybe cutting out the rest of our pieces. I'm not entirely sure what I want to do yet. Unplugging the battery is just the same as disconnecting power. That way this doesn't cut our hands while we're making the swap. I know we're going to need that again in a minute. All right, let's clean these ends up just a little bit. That looks pretty good. We've got two pieces of plate that are exactly the same size. We're looking at 5 by 16. So one of these will screw to the tabletop, and one of them our leg is going to weld straight to. I've got a flat disc too, sandpaper disc for that we may hit these with right before we assemble. But I'm pleased with that. We're going to go ahead and get this stuck out of the way. That might have been a good thing for us to work on. Okay, those will sandwich together. Let's go ahead and cut that bottom piece 22 inches. And I kind of feel like I want to bevel it. I think that would be kind of cool. Cut a 45-degree angle on both sides. This is way overkill for what we're doing, but it's what I had out in the scrap bin. So it's what we're going to use. Start stacking all my tools out here in front of us. See if we can stay tidy. All right. Let's start here by, let's just cut a 45 on one side of this. So from the very end, I'm going to cut a 45, or I'm going to mark a 45 back using our speed square. Mark across the top. There's no particular reason that I'm putting a 45 on this other than just I think it's going to look nice. Alright, I can see that my lines on the bottom lined up pretty well, and the top of our marks lined up pretty well. So let's go ahead and make that cut, and then we'll measure over our 22 inches. Alright, I think that looks pretty good. Looks like a pretty clean cut. I like the angle. What we'll do is we'll cut out some caps to weld on there, and that'll look slick. So I wanted these feet to be 22 inches long, or this spanner on the bottom. I'm really not sure what to call this. So we're going to measure over our 22. Looking at right there. The nice thing about these creative projects is in this case right here, it doesn't really matter. This is exactly 22 inches. I went over there, looked at the table, thought 22 would look nice, so it can be 21 and 7/8. It can be 22 and 1/8. Heck, it could be an inch plus or minus. Anyway, at 22, I'm marking my straight line across the bottom, and we're going to kick it back at a 45-degree angle, lining up my square with the back side of our soapstone mark. I'm going to go ahead and mark the other side right now too. Line up the square with the back side. It's almost time to sharpen our soapstone. Give this a little sharpen real quick. This is something you got to do while you're working. They go dull just like a pencil. Instead of a pencil sharpener, we got a file. That's metal work. Alright, I want to check and make sure that the top is going to line up. That looks pretty good. I like that, our line's connected. So we're in good shape. I'm going to go ahead and make a couple more cuts. We might have to change our disc again. It's also honestly a little bit challenging trying to make these cuts and throw sparks away from the camera. A little bit of an awkward setup right here. Alright, that turned out pretty good. Just a little bit of cleanup on that end. And on that end, we'll have some caps to put on. So that's going to go against the floor with our adjustable feet. One of these plates will be at the top, so we need to cut out a post still. We took some measurements at the job the other day. 34 3/8 high. 34 3/8 high. So I'm going to run in and grab our adjustable feet. We'll go ahead and mock this up, get a length, and make our last cut. I'm a big fan of mock-ups, so I ordered these adjustable feet for this project. I've not even taken them out of the packaging yet. We're using these adjustable feet in case the concrete's a little bit out of level, in case the top is a little bit out of level, and there's a good rubber surface to have on their floor. And I may even, it looks like we came with some adhesive-backed bumpers. I think we're going to plan on using those. I may go ahead and just put one on a foot right now so we can measure exactly. Yeah, I'll stick one on. I bought 4 feet. We only need 2. So if we waste one, that's not too big a deal. Those are going to go on the bottom of our spreader, like so. It's going to go something like that. I wish that foot would be all the way out here at the end, but you can see how this is going to interfere with that 45 that we cut. I think it'll look okay if they're right there. I'll need to round this off or something so it's not terribly sharp, definitely. We're going to need to get some nuts, because right now these will adjust up and down, but I'm going to want to be able to lock them in place so they don't move. So I need to account for the height of a nut right there. That nut's going to act as a set screw, so what we'll be able to do, we'll be able to adjust this foot in or out. Here's the receiver end of it. The way these adjustable feet work, the receiver end is going to weld into our square tube through these 3 holes. Instead of using screws, I'm just going to weld them straight into the square tube. And then I need the set screw. Once we have our height right, that set screw will back up against this like a jam nut, and that's going to set our height. So every time they take the table apart, they can put it back together and get it back in the exact same position, not have to adjust feet every time. So I really like, I think I want to, that gives me a 1/4 inch of play. I don't see why I would need more than that. 34 3/8 is what I measured one side of the table at. 34 1/8 is what I measured the other side of the table at. So we're going to shoot for 34 1/4. I'll make a quick note of that. 34 1/4. That's going to be our height to the bottom of the table. I really wanted to recess both of these pieces of steel in the bottom of the table, but it's only about 1.5 inches thick, and I'm worried about having enough meat for the screws and to recess the nuts on the back side. So we're going to split the difference. I'm going to recess one of these. Let's lay this all out. To the top of our piece of steel here. This total height from the bottom of the foot to the top of the steel needs to be 34 1/4. So if I measure down here, from the bottom of our foot, we're looking at 3 5/8 inches, and this should be a 1/4 inch. It is a 1/4 inch. So that'd be 3 7/8. It's 3 7/8 inches. 34 1/4 minus 3 7/8. It's 30 3/8. 30 3/8 plus 3 7/8 would be 33 3/8. 34 1/4. So 30 3/8 is going to be the length of our post. So let's go ahead and get that cut. Square cut on both ends. Then we can cut out our caps for the bottom of our spreader, do a little bit of cleanup, a little bit of drilling, and start welding. Those all matched up. That looks pretty square. Pretty pleased with that. Let's check this side too. I'm very pleased with that. What I was checking for, you check square this direction right here. We're going to check square that direction. Same thing, I can't see daylight under either edge of the square. Checked out on both sides, so I'm very pleased. That's going to have a big impact on our life later when we go to weld this stuff up. So here's our table leg right here, starting to take shape. And then our plate goes on top like so. This is what's going to bolt to our table. There's our support. I believe that'll be rigid enough. I need to decide if I'm going to weld up this joint down here or if I'm going to weld up this joint first. I'll be thinking about that while I go ahead and cut our plugs for the ends. Let's see if we have any scrap down here. We do. I'm a big fan of using scrap. Our tubing is actually 2-inch tubing, but I want to have a little bit of a radius on the ends with our weld. So I'm going to cut this. If this is 2 inches wide, we're 1 5/8 inside diameter. I think I'm going to cut 1 5/8 is too small. I'm going to go 1 3/4 wide by 2.5 long. Mark 2.5. Mark 2.5. All right, let's go ahead and make our cut. It's pretty warm. That looks like it's gonna work out just fine. Done. This was 5-inch plate. So I make a 2.5-inch cut. And we're rocking and rolling. Okay. Okay. Hot. All right. I think we have all our pieces cut out. That is really hot. I'm gonna grab some gloves and take that to the grinder and clean them up just a little bit. All right. Those fit nicely. That's what we're shooting for right there. We'll weld those up. Let's see how much space we gotta have if it's screwed all the way in. Screwed all the way in. We're gonna have to come back from the edge 2 inches. So we need to come back 2 inches and center up, and we'll go over to the drill press. You can see we've got lines 2 inches back from both ends. What that does is it's going to allow us to screw our foot in all the way without running through the bevel. You can see if I were to put it out here, it would actually hit on our cap before it was able to go all the way in. So by coming back 2 inches, we'll be able to screw this all the way in. Half-inch hole. An inch back. All right, let's go to the drill press. All right, let's drill some holes. I want to be dead center on this 2-inch square tube. So we're gonna set our fence 1 inch back from the drill bit, and we're also gonna use that 1 inch offset for drilling our plate. I'm gonna go ahead and put all of our bolts an inch in from the edges, so this will make everything really uniform. So to set up our fence, I've got to put a bit in here first. I'm going to go ahead and use a fairly small bit to get us exactly centered, and then I'll switch to a bigger bit when it's time to drill. I need to make sure we've got enough height. Tell you what, let's just put this big bit in. This will get us close enough. This is a homemade fence system. Some of y'all may have something with an actual adjustment on it, but this has worked well enough for me. That height is going to work just fine. I've got plenty of room to work with underneath that. I think that's going to be fine. So I want to measure back exactly 1 inch to the very center of the bit. So we're going to go 1 inch to the center of the bit. Getting where I can see it pretty well. That's 1 inch to the center there. I also want my fence to be straight this way. I've got some existing marks on this table from when I've worked before. So I'm getting us straight. I'm gonna make sure we're still at 1 inch, and then check both sides so our fence is straight. I'm seeing 11 1/8 right there. I've got 11 1/8 back right there. So now I know my fence is parallel with the front of the table. I'm gonna check and make sure we're still 1 inch back. We're still 1 inch back, so I'm gonna go ahead and use my clamps to lock this fence down. Once I've got it locked down, we're gonna go ahead and double check our measurements. All right, that's right at 1 inch. That's reading 11 1/8. 11 1/8, I'm pretty happy with that. One thing I could do is clamp a stop block on here 1 inch off to the side of the bit. While I think about putting a stop block on here for our plate, let's go ahead and drill these 2 holes for our feet. So this foot is going to go on the bottom like so. I need to drill a hole big enough for this collar to sit inside of it. So we're actually changing bits again. Let's put the step bit in. Let's just start drilling holes. All right. I actually have the center on this marked already with Sharpie. I'm going to make sure the drill bit aligns with it. And we might be a 1/16 of an inch off, but I'm going to go ahead and go for it. I think it's okay. Let's go ahead and drill a couple of holes. I really like these step bits, drilling through thick steel. See what we're looking like here. And it fell in, perfect. And it looks centered, I'm really happy with that. You can see how that just slips right in the hole. And then we'll plug weld in these 3 holes where the screws go, and our adjustable feet will slip right into that. It'll be super tidy. Let's do one more. Might be enough right there. Yep, looks great. I've got enough play in there. I over drilled them just a little bit, so you can see I can scoot that around side to side and get it exactly centered. It was really, really close, but that'll help me get it exactly centered. A little bit of an accident, but we're gonna say we did it on purpose. So this piece right here is ready for welding. I'm going back to a 3/8 bit now. We're gonna use 3/8 bolts to sandwich our mounting plates together. So we'll take our step drill bit out. You can see these step drill bits, super, super cool. The further you press the bit in, the wider your hole is going to be, and there's actually markings on the side here. Each of these shiny sections on the new bit represents a fixed size, 3/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/8 inch, and it's marked for everything in between, 11/16, 5/8, 9/16. Super cool bits. But I know we need a 3/8 hole right now. We're going to try using this straight bit. I think it's fairly sharp. Okay, 3/8 bit is installed. Here's our sandwich plates. I've already got them marked. We're going to drill holes on 4 corners to sandwich the plates together. I'll weld a nut to the back side so a bolt goes in from the accessible side. I'm going to put a stud in these 2 locations right here, and that stud is going to allow these plates to self-align while the homeowner gets his bolts put in. And I think I'm going to go ahead and just freehand these. I'm not going to worry about a stop. And I'm going to try to drill them stacked on each other so these holes are all exactly aligned. Let's see how one goes. I may need to add a little bit of oil to this. Tell you what, I'm going to grab a clamp and clamp these plates together. It's going to keep these plates from moving around at all, one to the other. Tied against the fence, the ends are flush. I like that pretty well. Got a little bit of oil handy up here if I need it. Let's see how this first hole goes. That looks centered just like I want it. That's a pretty good bit. I'm going slow, I'm not pushing hard. This is a good sharp bit. I really like the look of the shavings that's rolling out. You notice that metal's curling when it comes out. It's not coming out in little chips. That's a sign you've got a good sharp bit. We've got 4 corner holes drilled. You know what? I really like the idea of offsetting these holes so this can only go back on one way. I really like that. I'm gonna make that change. It's okay to change plans partway through. So what I'm worried about, I wanna make sure these plates always go back together exactly like this. If I put these holes dead center, it'd be simple enough for this plate to go back on, index the other direction. If I scoot these holes for the dowel pins off center, 3/4 of an inch even, 1/2 an inch, it'll be obvious that these plates are not lined up unless it's lined up exactly right. So that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go back to, let's just pull it in 1/2 inch. So let's bring this back to 1 inch where I started to set it up. I thought I wanted to be centered on these. By making this only install one way, that verifies that our holes are always aligned, even if they're slightly not uniform. Okay, so I'm drilling these holes off center on purpose. All right, all of our big holes are drilled. So we've got the holes we need for dowels and for 4 bolts to hold our sandwich plates together. What we need to do now is pre-drill some holes to screw the main plate to the tabletop. So we got dowels going in 2 holes, 4 bolts. 4 bolts go together. Say 4 bolts go together. Yep, sure enough, good deal. And we're gonna use just the shank on these longer bolts as a dowel. And that's nice and tight. We'll end up cutting the head off, welding that in, and then cutting the other side flush. That'll give us 2 dowels. And I might taper them just a little bit. So the top plate, this is what we're gonna weld the table to. We'll weld the table straight on something like that right there. So or the leg. The leg gets welded straight onto the middle there. This is our bottom plate, it's finished. This one, we're gonna be using these 3/4 inch wood screws with a bevel on the head to fasten this to the tabletop. And that doesn't protrude very much. I'm gonna get every bit I can, so we're gonna countersink these for sure. So we're gonna start by drilling, I believe it's a 3/16 hole for the threads. Then I'm gonna use a separate bit. It might even be a 1/2 inch. I'm gonna countersink these possibly with a 1/2 inch bit to get this head down below the surface. We're not gonna have any problem with this pulling through the steel, so I can countersink it and nearly use all of these threads going into the wood. With 12 of these screws, I hope that'll be enough to hold it on. I'd much rather use a longer screw, but by the time we mortise this into the tabletop and have a 3/4 inch screw, we're talking about using 1 inch of the thickness on that tabletop that's only 1 3/8 inches thick. I didn't want to risk blowing through or have any cracks show through on the top side of the table. Now I need to figure out how I want to lay this out. What I was afraid of, by the time I put this nut on the back side right there, I'm going to have to mortise out or drill a recess in the tabletop to clear this nut, and by the time I do, there's not going to be any meat for a screw to go in that corner right there. So I'm going to go ahead and pull our screws back away from these holes. Now that I have so many lines, let's see if I can maybe make sense of it and drill in the right place. Now it's time to countersink these. See if we can come up with a bit that'll get just the right shape. They make metal countersinks. I don't have one handy here. You can see this is what we're countersinking right here. We want this head to sit flush or just below the surface of the steel, so this is nice and smooth, so our sandwich plate can fit on here tight. These are all going to be hidden when the table leg is assembled. I'm happy with that. We're plenty below the surface. I've got as much threads as possible showing through the bottom of that, as many threads as possible showing through the bottom of that. Let's go ahead and drill the rest out. A lot of the work we do, it's a shame that nobody ever gets to see it. No one will ever see this. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. That's all the screws we got. We've got 2 holes for dowels, 4 holes for our corner bolts that are going to sandwich these 2 plates together. And this is the plate that screws directly to the tabletop. And then we'll have nuts welded to the back side of this so we can just screw in the leg assembly. Instead of I initially thought about using one of these plates and just wood screwing into the top, but if you removed it and assembled it multiple times, the homeowner or whoever's using it, it would eventually wear out those holes and waller them out in the wood. Whereas having nuts welded to the back here, we'll be able to assemble and disassemble this many, many times without issue. So pretty cool. We'll get that all wiped up. And the next stage will be probably just some basic cleanup on the corners, just knocking burrs off and welding this up. That's where we're going to wrap this portion of our project. Next time, we're going to get this welded up and assembled. We're going to paint it. I'm going to teach you guys how to make a plywood jig and use a router to actually cut the mortise in our wooden tabletop. Then we'll head over to the project and get this installed. Please like, subscribe, share, do all the things that help us build our new channel. And let me know in the comments if you want to see more of any particular thing or if I'm boring you to death with some of it. Anyway, thanks guys very much. I hope you learned something, and we'll see you next time.